All right, let's dive into something that all the data points to as a massive reason why people walk away from their faith: a serious lack of intellectual preparation. We're going to see why arming young people with answers to tough questions isn't just some nice little extra. It's absolutely essential for building a faith that can actually last. So just imagine this for a second. There's a teenager, right? She grew up in the church. I mean, faith is a huge part of her life. She knows all the songs by heart. She's got this amazing community. But here's the thing. She's never really been equipped for a serious challenge to what she believes. And then, bam, she's in a college lecture hall. A professor she respects just systematically takes apart the historical case for the resurrection of Jesus. And in that moment, it hits her. She's got nothing. No answers. No one ever walked her through a serious response to these kinds of arguments. You see, what's happening here isn't just a faith crisis. It's a preparation failure. Her faith was totally sincere, no doubt about it. But it was like a house of cards, you know? It was never really built to withstand a direct hit. And look, her story, it's not some one-off thing. When you zoom out and look at the national data, you see this exact scenario playing out on a massive scale. And the number one reason young people say they leave their faith, well, it might not be what you think. It's intellectual. They just stop believing. I mean, the consistency here is just striking. A major 2024 study from PRRI found that a whopping 67% of people who are now religiously unaffiliated said a key reason for leaving was that they just stopped believing the teachings. Think about that. This isn't some side issue. It's right at the very heart of the problem. And it's not just one study. You look at Pew Research, 46% of people who left said it's because they stopped believing. A Lifeway study, it found that 70% of young people who used to go to church pointed to reasons tied directly to their beliefs. So the message from all of these different sources is crystal clear. A loss of belief is the big common thread. And it is so important to get this right. These are not just, emotional problems dressed up as intellectual questions. We're talking about genuine, honest-to-goodness questions about truth and reason that these young people feel completely unprepared to answer. It's like their faith was never fortified for this kind of collision. So this all leads to a really powerful idea that researchers have pinpointed as a key preventative strategy. It's called the inoculation model. And it's all about getting ready for these intellectual challenges before they blow up into a full-blown faith crisis. Think about it like a vaccine, right? The whole idea is to give young people an early, controlled exposure to the toughest questions and the most serious objections to Christianity. But here's the key. You do it inside a safe and trusted environment like a youth group, or even just talking with your family. And we're talking about the really hard questions here, the kind of stuff that falls under the banner of apologetics, which is just a fancy word for making a reasoned defense of your faith. Things like the problem of evil, how can we trust the Bible, what's the real evidence for the resurrection, how do science and faith fit together? Instead of running from these topics, the inoculation model dives right in. And the result is, well, it's pretty brilliant. When that student gets to the college lecture or a friend asks them a really tough question, they're not walking into completely unknown territory. They've been here before. They have a framework. They've already started to build a map. Now, this isn't just a nice theory. There's actually some compelling research that shows this kind of intellectual formation has a real, tangible, measurable impact on how resilient a person's faith is. Take this, for example. A peer-reviewed study looked at apologetics education in high schools, and what they found was that it did way more than just increase what students knew. It actually led to measurable spiritual growth, gave them way more confidence when their beliefs were challenged, and even made them more willing to talk about their faith with others. Another academic study on youth skepticism really hit the nail on the head. They found that the teenagers they studied weren't hostile to faith. Not at all. They just wanted their doubts to be taken seriously. They weren't trying to be rebellious. They were simply unanswered. Okay, so this all points to this big idea of building what researchers are now calling resilient disciples. And really, the crucial difference between a faith that just kind of fades away and one that actually lasts, it often boils down to one simple thing: moving from a faith that's just inherited to one that's been personally examined. I mean, look at Barna's big Faith for Exile study. They tracked thousands of young adults who grew up Christian, and the finding was, well, it's pretty sobering. Only about 10%, just 10%, ended up with a deeply rooted, resilient faith as they moved into adulthood. Only 1 in 10. So what made that 10% different? Well, it came down to a fundamental fork in the road. Most followed this path of drift, where they were kept away from hard questions and their faith was just something they inherited. But the resilient ones? They walked a totally different path. They had meaningful exposure to those exact same hard questions, and that forced them to personally dig in and make their faith their own. And this right here is the key takeaway for any parent, pastor, or community trying to pass on faith. The churches that successfully formed these resilient disciples, they didn't try to bubble wrap them from difficulty or doubt, just the opposite. They taught them how to walk right through it with confidence. So when you look at all this data, the conclusion is pretty much unavoidable. Apologetics, intellectual formation, this isn't some niche ministry for the super smart kids. It is baseline, fundamental preparation for any young person trying to follow their faith in a world that is full of questions. Okay, so we've spent the last 4 explainers really diagnosing the core reasons why the next generation is walking away. In our final segment, we're going to shift gears. We're moving from diagnosis to prescription, laying out the practical, research-backed strategies that churches can start using right now to turn these trends around. And as we wrap this up, let's just leave with this question. Is our goal simply to pass on a list of beliefs to be memorized? Or are we actually equipping the next generation with the tools to think critically, to wrestle honestly, and ultimately to own their faith for themselves? Because really, the answer to that question might just determine everything.